Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning, David, and welcome to podcast number 12.
Good morning, David. And hope you're having a good week and looking forward to a nice Canada Day celebration.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the long weekends, especially Canada Day, because, it really marks the beginning of something that I think everybody looks forward to, which is a nicer weather and cottage country.
Yeah. Well, I dressed appropriate. I don't know if it'll show up good here, but I got my Canada flag on. I've got my hats ready to go.
You're representing today.
I'm very proud Canadian, and it's our country, like every other country in the world, makes mistakes along its path, and we got to correct things and get better. But still, the greatest country in the world to live in.
No doubt, and I mean, our real estate market, what it's doing, is really a reflection of that. In my belief, people from all over the world want to live in Canada. They want to lay roots in Canada. We have stability, we have clean air, we have, a great economy, and people from all over the world want to, enjoy that lifestyle that we have to offer. And it's very much reflected in our real estate market.
No, it is. And it's the greatest country, and we're a country of immigrants. Everybody came from somewhere at some generation. And we're a melting pot, and it's something to be celebrated. And everybody, after they're here, the first generation that arrives may not get it, but the second generation all of a sudden becomes a hockey fan. Wherever they came from, whatever sports they play, eventually they don't give up on those sports. I know you like soccer, I like soccer, and there's tons of soccer fans, but no matter what country people come from, eventually they become a hockey fan here too. It's just part of our Canadian culture, and that should be embraced, but you should never give up on other traditions and things that people bring over from other countries. I think that's one of the greatest things about Canada, is that we can do that. But people come here for a reason. There's a better opportunity here than the countries that they're generally leaving. And
yes, absolutely.
We have to celebrate it every year. I think it's the greatest, and glad that we live here. Glad my children have all chosen to stay here and raise their children here. So happy Canada Day, everybody.
Happy Canada Day. And you know what? It's really a big celebration. And I think as Canadians, we have to do a better job of being patriotic and really embracing the whole Canada culture and what Canada stands for, because sometimes we tend to forget. And I always look at our neighbors down south and look how patriotic they are. There's probably not one single house on the street that doesn't have an American flag on it. And it's something that I really admire, and I wish Canadians were a little bit more patriotic. But there's no doubt that everybody living here really loves Canada and loves what we stand for and loves everything that Canada offers. So, David, I'm glad to see you're wearing your Canada t-shirt and your Canada hat, and you're representing for both of us.
Yeah. Well, and the day before Canada Day every year is, in my business, usually the busiest day of the year for real estate closings. June 30th in most years is the single busiest day for closings. It's not as bad as it once was, because people have sort of learned through the real estate agents that you don't have to close on the last day of the month for any particular reason. So don't, because it's better to not. So it gets spread out a little bit more. But even for some reason this year, I was looking at it, and we had a ton of closings on the 15th of June. And then we have a ton of closings on the 30th of June. And there's no magic why people are picking the 15th of the month. But somehow they get encouraged to do that. But for anybody out there, there's no reason to close on the 15th of the month or the 30th day of the month if you have another opportunity, because those days, like, the banks are going absolutely crazy today, trying to get funds out, trying to keep up. Law offices like mine have a a real busy day and we want to get everybody closed by the end of the day, and we got a time limit. We got to get it done by the end of the day or they don't get the keys.
Yeah.
And if tomorrow is a Thursday, but if it was a Friday, then they don't get in for the whole weekend, right? So the pressure's on.
Yeah, and if there are any issues that come up, or if there's any issues even on the banking side and delay of fund side, there is a delay in obtaining keys, right? Because you can't close on the Thursday on Canada Day. So the next possible day is the Friday, and of course, if there are any other issues, then you're looking after the weekend, and you're closing on the 5th of July, which is not something anybody wants to do.
Yeah. So, anyways, just some advice for people out there: avoid closing the last day of the month if you can. There's no magic to it.
Yeah, and we are seeing a trend involved here at the brokerage level where people are closing on Thursdays, so not on the Fridays, but the day before, and Wednesdays, to give themselves a little bit more time. Yeah. And if any issues arise, you have an extra 2 days to resolve them before you're locked in for the weekend. So we are seeing those trends emerge, but again, great topic of conversation, and it's always good to bring that to light as well.
Yeah. Well,
so wanted to talk a little bit about the market, give everybody an update as to what the market is doing. So when we look at number of solds month over month, we're negative 5% in Mississauga. Number of showings has dropped by 8% month over month. And the number of offers coming in has dropped 16% month over month. But again, you look at the year-to-date numbers, and they're still extremely, extremely strong, right? So again, we're coming off that big high, but our market is still very strong, very active. There's not a lot of inventory out there. In fact, there's really very little inventory out there, and listings are moving. Again, it's really imperative that you price properties properly, and that you do a little bit of legwork and make sure that the property looks its best before coming onto the market.
Yeah, great advice. And it's still, like you said, it's still a very strong market. It's just you can't sustain the levels that we were at a couple months ago. It's unrealistic to ever expect that. So it had to come down a little bit. And it did, and it's still in any year, it's still a very active, good market. So everybody should still get out there and know the opportunities are there. And it settled down a little bit, so which is good news for people that are trying to buy, anyways, because a little bit less of that multi-offer frenzy that was going on. So the prices will be a little more realistic and a little more affordable, and things are still active out there. So that's great. Thanks for that update.
Absolutely. Now, I know last podcast we touched on a very interesting topic, which is the MLS listing information, right? And who's responsible to make sure that the information is accurate. So I'm really looking forward to diving in today and really peeling back some layers and really discussing that topic, because it's a great one, and it's one that affects both buyers and sellers, and really goes to the core of the stability of our real estate market.
Yeah, well, and I think you just have to look at it like, what is a listing? It's basically an advertisement where you're putting information out, trying to entice people to come take a look at the property by putting out all the features and everything. But it has a certain restriction, because it has to be truthful, like all advertising does. You can't falsely advertise to sell a product of any sort. There's laws that prevent that, and in here there's RECO controls over things, over the agents, and the agents have to act honestly and put out correct information. And that's a big function of what an agent does, is to gather all the information that goes into a listing, make sure it's accurate, and then put it out there. But it's really an invitation for people to come look at the property. Here's the great features of the property. Here what we're selling for, and that you're trying to get people to come in. It's a different issue when you're trying to discuss, well, is the information in there binding on the seller, and is it something that the buyer can rely on? And I know you've had there's lots of issues that come up with those types of questions.
No, there are. And I mean, again, it goes to the heart of the real estate agent that you hire to represent you in the biggest transaction of your life. And, that due diligence process, like you have to go through that due diligence process. You got to make sure that the information is accurate, is complete, and is representative of the property that you're selling. And that really goes to the integrity of the whole MLS system and, how we kind of talk about organized real estate. It all starts with having those procedures and policies in place to make sure that the information is accurate and it can be relied on by parties looking to enter into a transaction, right? The issue here is that the buyer's agent always has to verify the information first, right, to protect the buyer, right? So the information is there, and every single effort is made to make sure that the information is correct, up to date, and as accurate as possible. However, the buyer agent still has to verify all the information and has to go through that due diligence process to really protect the buyer in the process. And I think that's the point that we really want to hammer home today.
Right. So if you're a buyer, I guess the issue becomes, as a buyer, can you rely on what the buyer's agent is supposed to do in looking at the MLS and verifying to you that everything in there looks to be true and accurate, best that they can determine. And if you're the seller, you're relying on the seller's agent to put that together. It's not the seller putting it together, it's the seller's agent that's putting it together, but it's based on information that the seller's providing. So there is an onus on the seller to be providing his agent with the proper information as well. But you're right, it's both agents have to take a look at it. Buyer's agent can't walk in blindly and say, oh, whatever's in this listing, I'm going to just accept and believe that it's true. Like, as you and I know, and we've discussed on these podcasts, like there's agents, and then there's good agents, and there's fabulous agents, and there's not so good agents. And the same thing with lawyers. And we have to check what each other is doing. And we can't just assume that everybody's doing their job properly. And we have an onus on us to be good lawyers and to be good agents to go and check things out for ourselves.
Yeah. And it really works as a check and balance process, right? So if I'm the seller's agent, I'm verifying everything that the seller is telling me, not to see if it's true or false, but to be that second check and to make sure that the information is as accurate as possible, right? So I'm looking at the land registry to make sure that I have the name spelled correctly, that I have the middle name or initial, that whether one spouse or both spouses are untitled. I'm verifying the lot information on what's recorded. I'm triple verifying that by asking the seller to provide an existing survey and checking the lot dimensions, right? If the lot dimensions on the survey are written in meters, I'm converting them to feet and verifying that the measurements are still accurate, right? If there is a discrepancy, I might be calling the in-house surveyor that we have to get his opinion on what really are the true lot size information. I might get a letter from his office and attach that to the listing. But every step of the way, as the seller's agent, I'm verifying what the seller is telling me to triple check that all the information is accurate and complete.
Yeah, and that includes the legal description. Make sure you have the proper legal description and you're taking a look at that. And if there's a survey available, sometimes that helps as well. And then see if there might be something, even in the legal description that we've talked about before, there might be a right of way, there might be an easement, there might be something like that that's part of the description. And you want to dig down a little bit and try and say, hey, what is that? We just recently had one where there was 2 encroachment agreements registered on title. One sort of in favor of the homeowner with the city because there was a big old stone wall that was built like 100 years ago, but it's really on the city lands, but it's, so an encroachment agreement was entered into to allow that to remain because it's really like sort of a beautiful stone wall, like stone fence that no one would want to move, but there happens to be encroachment agreements. You see legal description, what you want to look into, what does that mean? Encroaching what? And the second encroachment happens to be in the backyard because the neighbor's garage actually encroaches onto this homeowner's lot. And it's done so for 80 years by a foot or something, but the parties entered into an encroachment agreement. If you were physically on the property, you would never see, you never even think. It looks like the garage is on their own property. You wouldn't really know, but by surveying, everything turns out it's on somebody else's. So there's a reference in it to just an encroachment agreement or some sort of agreement, but the agents then have to go and say, hey, what is this about? You can't just accept that. You got to do a little digging to find out, because that's going to stay on. It's not, whoever's going to buy that property is going to take it subject to that. So that's all part of what an agent has to go through. And then if they can't figure it out, like in this case, they contact their friendly neighborhood lawyer to say, hey, what are these encroachments all about? You take a look at it.
I'm making a note because I think this is an excellent topic for our next podcast.
Well, while you're doing
and I have a million questions, but I feel like if I ask them, we're going to go completely off topic. So I'm just going to make some notes as we're going along. But Dave, I really enjoy these conversations because as we go through this whole process, like I'm learning so much as well. As a broker owner, and I think it's having these conversations and making sure that there's a great flow of information between our two offices that just makes this relationship so special and unique.
Yeah, well, it's true. It's like going to school every week because it gives us a chance to think about these topics and to discuss it and hear it from my viewpoint, from your viewpoint, coming from two different directions. Because we're, as soon as you say something, my head starts spinning. Oh, what about this and this and that? And I got to go back and tell people in my office and remind them certain things too that come out of these podcasts. So it's very therapeutic somehow to go through this.
Well, I'm glad, I'm not the only crazy one, and you're enjoying these as much as I am as well. And we hope our audience is enjoying these as well. We hope you're taking away a lot of points and you're learning and that the whole reason we're doing this is to really raise the bar in the industry. So I hope everybody listening is enjoying these as much as we are as well.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Just to get back on the MLSE, the multiple listing, I confuse the MLS with MLSE, which is right. Sports just gets into my head all the time. So, but the bottom line with the listing, because the biggest question is the listing binding on a seller, right? And the basic answer is no. Okay. It does not form part of an agreement of purchase and sale. And once an agreement of purchase sale is entered into, there's a standard clause in the agreement of purchase sale that's saying that there are no reps and warranties or representations. If it's not in the agreement of purchase and sale in writing and in that contract, then it's not binding on the parties. So it's basically telling you.
Common law, David?
Sorry?
This goes back to common law?
Goes back to common law, and it goes back also to the way the actual standard agreements of purchase sale are drafted, because they have that clause in there that in the printed form that says, you can't rely on any verbal representations or warranties or anything else that's not in this written contract. So if you really want the information that's in a listing to be binding on a seller, then you have to really attach that as a schedule to the agreement of purchase and sale, where the seller is basically saying, I represent and warrant that all information in the listing attached as the schedule is true and correct or true and accurate or something. Then you might have recourse if there's a mistake, or if they don't attach as a schedule, if they just refer to it even in a clause in the agreement of purchase and sale to say that listing is part of the contract. So anything that's in there is binding. Otherwise, the general law is that it's not binding because it's not part of the written agreement. Okay. Now, then you get into common law and you look at fact situations, and there's always a certain fact situation that goes against that general rule where, maybe there was some communication, maybe of reliance on it. You'd have to look at the whole history, because if there was communication between the agents on behalf of the parties, buyers, can I rely on all this information in the listing that it's accurate? And the seller or the seller goes back and says, yeah, you can rely on it as if it's part of the agreement. Like there might be enough of a written communication where it's interpreted that it was deemed to be attached or part of the transaction, but that's, it would be a unique situation. The general rule is it's not binding. Okay.
Wow.
So that's why the buyer's agent has to look at it and verify the information as well. Now, if a seller and the seller's agent are, deliberately misleading on something that a buyer wouldn't be able to verify or check out, and I can't even think of an example off the top of my head, then there might be a chance to argue that, that there was some fraud or some misrepresentation and there was some reliance on that would give a right to a claim. But generally the answer is no. If you really want it to be binding, you attach it as a schedule to your agreement of purchase and sale.
Wow. I have a great story about a situation where a buyer was represented by an agent, and they walked into a house in Rotary Marsh, which is a very specific neighborhood in Mississauga. Now, the seller was also a registered real estate agent, and her niche and specialty was in Rotary Marsh. She's a very well-known agent in that neighborhood. And the buyer, and during the first appointment, the seller and the seller's husband were present at the property because the property just went on the market. And the buyer's agent booked an appointment, took the buyer through. They were the first ones through the property. And they asked the seller and the real estate agent, how big is this bungalow? To which she answered, the bungalow is 2,700 square feet. And the buyer said, oh, okay, how do you know that? And she said, well, we had some architectural drawings drawn up for a second-story addition. And you would have over 7,500 square feet of living space if you put a second-story addition. So for sure, it's 2,700 square feet. The buyer said, okay, great. Now, the buyer agent drove right to the office to prepare an offer. By the time the offer was prepared, he was notified that he was already in a multiple offer situation. Now, this is mere hours after the listing is on the market, okay?
Wow.
By the time the buyer agent printed the offer, got the buyer to sign, he got notified that there's now a second offer registered on this property. So by the time he registered his offer, there were 3 offers on the property. Now, the offer was all 3 offers were presented about 2 hours later, okay? And this particular agent won in a multiple offer situation nearly about 4 hours after the house was listing on MLS. His buyers were the successful bid on the property. Now you can see where I'm going with this. After the buyer scheduled his first revisit and brought the mother-in-law through the property, mother-in-law looked around and said, I don't think this bungalow is 2,700 square feet. Can you pull the square footage report? Buyer agent pulls the square footage report. Bungalow is 2,100 square feet, right? And of course, the buyer submitted a complaint against the listing agent, who happens to be the homeowner as well. And RECO pulled the buyer's agent into this as well and said the buyer's agent should have verified the information, the square footage information. And of course, the buyer agent said, well, I had no time, it was 3 hours, multiple offers, had to move quickly, had to do whatever we can to secure the property. And RECO said, doesn't matter, you should have verified. You should have taken the time. If this is an important issue to your buyer, then you should have verified what the square footage report is. And then the buyer agent even said, well, you know what, the listing agent who is the homeowner, very specialized market, very specialized niche market, her information should have carried more weight and more professional weight should have been placed because of the niche market and the unique situation. And RECO said, we don't care. Still, buyer should have verified. So very, very interesting information. And by the way, the MLS data sheet also had 25 to 3,000 square feet selected on it. So not only did the seller and the listing agent, the same person verified that information, but it was also verified in the MLS data sheet on the property. So, you know, very clear train of thought on their side that the house was clearly bigger than it was in actuality, and RECO ruled against the buyer agent in this situation as well.
So when RECO makes a decision like that, like what is the penalty or the repercussion? Like what happens?
So, I mean, it was an administrative fine for the buyer agent, right? Because, I mean, I think RECO kind of looked at the situation that there was less liability onus on them. But on the seller's agent, that went to a full disciplinary committee.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's still in the works. It takes a while to go through that.
Okay. But, you know, it's interesting because those RECO findings are really discipline proceedings against the two agents, right? To keep them in line. But it's not an action for damages by a buyer against a seller or a seller against a buyer or something like, you know, can the buyer get out of the transaction saying, you know, you misrepresented and, you know, and therefore I suffered some damage that I want the seller to pay for, or the seller and the seller's agent. Like that's sort of a separate issue.
And it's a difficult one because this was 100 by 200 foot lot that was purchased. And literally within 6 months of purchasing the property, you know, the appraisal or sorry, the appreciation was over $500,000 in that particular property.
Yeah.
That pocket became extremely sought after, and those kind of lots became very rare. And I mean, today that's probably a $2.4 million property. So over $1 million of appreciation over the last 3 years for that particular buyer. So, I mean, in hindsight, I think it was a great, you know, investment.
Yeah.
You know, they were just looking for the square footage, which wasn't there. So, you know, David, in this situation, how would they broach the topic of damages?
Well, it might be that there weren't any damages in this case because, you know, the property was actually worth what they paid for it. It's interesting because the general law on these type of situations, when these have gone to court, is that the courts find that, you know, the buyers in this type of situation on a resale property, they're generally buying what they see. Okay. They're not making an offer based on square footage. You know, they're not saying I'm going to pay you X dollars per square foot of the house and relying on the seller to tell me that it was 2,700 square feet and then I'm paying you X dollars per foot. So obviously if it's only 2,100 feet, then they say I am entitled to an abatement, but that's not the way these transactions are put out, right? If they were buying a vacant lot or vacant land that was based on acreage and the agreement of purchase and sale said, you know, I'm paying you, you know, $10,000 per acre or something like that, and there's a figure in it, but it was per acre, then it's material as to what the actual acreage is, right? And if there's a representation that it's 100 acres and it turns out it's 90 acres, it's easy to calculate what the damages are because both parties intended the transaction to be based on the acreage. Same way you could structure an agreement that's based on the square footage of a house. You know, builder sales are different sometimes because you have materials in a sales office say, you know, here's the model you're choosing and it's 2,700 square feet. Okay. But that's in the brochures and the pamphlet, the marketing material. Sometimes that information will get attached as a schedule to the agreement of purchase and sale. So you know that you're buying, here's the layout, it's attached as a schedule and it's saying 2,700 square feet. But there'll also be some language in those builder deals saying to give them a little bit of leeway that it might be 3% or 5% higher or lower, and you know, and there's a margin of error built into it. But at least in those situations, someone can make an argument, hey, builder, you told me it was 2,700 feet. You attached a schedule to my agreement, so it's saying it's 2,700 feet, and it's only 2,100 feet. That's not within that 3% or 5%. Therefore, they'd be entitled to an abatement or maybe to get out of the transaction. On a resale like this, like that's not part of the transaction. Nobody was buying it unless they put a specific clause in saying, we're buying this because it's 2,700 square feet, and that's what you've told us. It doesn't say that. You're buying what you see, and that's what the courts generally look at. You liked what you saw, you thought it was worth whatever you were offering, it was accepted. And by the way, a lot of other people think it's worth that too, because there's multi-offers.
Right. And
Right?
and that's a very interesting perspective on it, and that's kind of the test that the courts apply. It's the reasonable people test, right, to these transactions. And a lot of learning lessons here. Like, I mean, if we were to extract all the learning lessons here, but I mean, a lot of really important points, right? So buyers, beware, verify. Selling agents, make sure you triple check. And the other thing as a buyer agent is if there are some neat features such as square footage or, a right of way or a parking garage or something that's really important to your buyers, then make sure you attach that to Schedule A and mention that you're relying on this to be true or this to be accurate or this to be the case in the APS. So then, you can link those characteristics to the specific sale.
Yeah. And we've run into situations like this over the years too, just with lot size alone. Forget about square footage, but just lot size, that it's supposed to be a 50 by 100 foot lot. And then it turns out when you get a survey, it's 49 feet by 100 or something like that. And buyers, they told me it was 50. I thought I was buying a 50-foot lot. So am I entitled to an abatement to this? Am I entitled to get out of the transaction? And it's generally no, because you bought what you saw, right? You liked the property and you put an offer in it. If the lot size was critical to you, then you got to make sure that's an essential part of the contract, right in the agreement purchase and sale, that we're buying it based on it being a 50-foot lot and we want it remeasured. If it turns out it's less, we want an abatement. On the other hand, if it turns out it's more, are they going to pay more for that? If it turns out it was 51 feet, right? They're not going to want to increase their purchase price. So that's why this generally doesn't form part of an agreement of purchase and sale for resale. You're basically buying what you see. Okay. So we recently had an issue that came up on a listing because the listing talked about, mentioned hardwood floor on the certain rooms in the second floor or something. It was hardwood flooring. And it turns out, they find out, after the agreement was signed and everything, it was a form of hardwood, but it's really like a laminate. It's not wood hardwood, okay?
Right.
And all of a sudden they're going crazy on it. The listing said it was hardwood floor. It turns out it's a laminate, and we want an abatement in the purchase price because we want the cost of replacing that floor with a hardwood floor. So we're on the seller side. So we took a hardline stance on this, saying, first of all, it's in the listing, it's not in the agreement of purchase and sale, it's not binding. You saw the property a few times, you had an inspection, you had opportunities to verify and look at the hardwood, walk on it, touch it, feel it, have your people do it, do whatever you want. You waived all conditions and you bought what you saw. So we're making all those type of arguments. Plus the argument is some people prefer a laminate floor than hardwood. To some people, it has more value than the hardwood floor. It's less upkeep. It's, there's reasons why people prefer it. So it's, anyways, and the other lawyer, just kept not accepting our position, kept coming back, we're entitled, we're pushing for an abatement. We forced them to close. We said, look, this is not a reason for you not to close, because you can recover any damages. If you're right, you can replace the floor and sue our client for the cost of the floor, sue the agents, or sue anybody you want to sue if you think you're really right, and replace it and try and recover the cost and let a judge decide. And we forced them to close, and they did, and reserve their rights to sue afterwards. It's been 2 months. We haven't heard anything. And I'd be really surprised if we do hear. And if we do hear, I'm confident in our seller's position, even though, yes, the listing should have been clearer. It would have been better if it said it was a laminate flooring. But David, when you're putting things in a listing, you're not describing every item to the to the fullest, to the nth degree. And you never know what somebody's going to really rely on. But if you put carpet in the family room, like, do you have to describe that it's, what type of ply it is or how thick it is? It's a carpet.
Yeah, and a lot of the times, room dimensions and room descriptions are confused, right? What I might think is a family room, you might interpret as the living room, because that's more conducive to your lifestyle. Like the
Right.
first that you come in, that's where the family's going to hang out the most. That's your
Right.
family room, and for me, it might be the room closest to the kitchen. That's open concept. That has the fireplace. That's my family room, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, but even when you look at some of the quality of laminate products that they have nowadays, I mean, you really have to, and I do this all the time, like the best way of finding out what a type of a product it is if you lift up a vent. Of course, do this without doing any damage, but if you lift up a vent and then you can actually see the type of product it is from underneath, and you can see if it's engineered, if it's laminate, if it's real hardwood all the way through. That's the best way of telling what kind of a product it is. And listen, I've been doing this for a really long time. I have a huge construction background, and some of these products out there are really tough to tell just because of how well they make them, right? So again, here's a little trick and tip. And if you're in the house and you want to check what kind of floor it really is, lift up a vent and really take a look of how it's made. If you see different layers, chances are it's an engineered hardwood. If you see something that looks like a pressed particle board, chances are it's a laminate floor. And then if it's solid wood all the way through and you can see beautiful grain all the way through, it's a solid hardwood product.
Right. So you as an agent, if you're the listing agent, how would you describe that type of flooring? Would you go into detail and describe it as an engineered hardwood or a laminate or real hardwood? Like, how would you describe that?
I would, because I mean, for me, I'm a stickler to details, and I love little details like that. And I think, there are certain benefits to having an engineered floor in terms of durability, scratching, especially with animals, right? There's also benefits to having a natural wood floor product. You can refinish it, you can restain it. It's more hypoallergenic for some people, right? So I think it's important to describe things like that accurately and take the time when you're listing the home and really go through it in detail. And I think it's going to save a lot of issues for all parties down the line as well.
Exactly. So go the extra step and describe it properly. And then there's no issue down the road, because, and again, we know different people would prefer different types of hardwood. Some might have real hardwood and they say, oh, I don't want real hardwood. I'm going to rip it out and I'd rather put in a carpet, or I'd rather put an engineered floor because I got pets or something like that. Right. So you never know which way it actually adds value to a particular buyer. But from a seller's point of view, you want to give them the information, and then it's up to them to choose. Because no matter who's buying a resale house, there's certain things in the house that people like. They like the house enough to buy it, but there's always something they're going to want to change. Yeah. And sometimes, it might be the favorite thing that the seller enjoyed, and they think it's one of the great selling features. And that's the item that the buyer is going to rip out and replace. Yeah. Like, you never know.
And another tip and trick is, when you're doing an offer presentation and you're representing the buyer, be careful in how you convey to the seller that you're going to be ripping floors out or changing things, because a lot of the time the seller is really emotionally attached to certain products, and it might actually work against you and your client if you say, oh, you know what, we're going to be ripping this carpet out, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. You always have to read people, ask a lot of questions, and really make sure that you're not crossing that line and disrespecting or insulting or even rubbing somebody the wrong way when representing a client. Really important as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Parties have to be careful what they say while they're there, and that's why a lot of times it's really not a good idea for if the seller is actually home, or the seller's agent might be there, buyers are going to be careful what they're saying in front of them, because it could become material if there's a dispute down the road. Because if the seller hears the buyer saying, well, I'm going to rip up this floor and I'm going to maybe even tear down a wall, and we're going to totally renovate this. And then later on is complaining that it turns out to be a laminate floor and not hardwood.
Yeah.
So even if, that was a misstatement in the listing, there's evidence that could come to court if it ever goes there saying, hey, the buyer wasn't relying on that. The buyer's plan was to rip it all out anyways. It wasn't like there was any real value there. So even if we made a mistake, there's no damage. There's no damages to them, right? So you got to be careful in what you're saying.
Yeah. And David, the other trend that we're seeing a lot in flooring is the emergence of these vinyl products, right? And before, vinyl was really regarded as an inferior product, right? But now the types of vinyls that are coming out, we're seeing 10 millimeters thick, beautiful vinyl flooring that looks just like hardwood. Mm-hmm. And of course, the benefit is it's the only floor type that's 100% waterproof, right? So we're seeing some massive applications, a lot on the commercial side, but just because of the durability of the product, we are starting to see it a lot on the residential applications now too, and it's a fabulous product. 100% waterproof, really easy to install, very durable, scratch resistant. And that's probably the hardest product to tell apart from some of the other ones, just because of how well it's made as well.
Right. And depending on lifestyle and everything, you got pets, you got kids, you're better off having that a lot of times than hardwood. And there's real value in having that, even though the hardwood might be a more expensive material. It not necessarily something better, right? So anyways, the bottom line is, from an agent's point of view, these things should be described. Do your homework, describe it properly in your listing. And if you're on the buyer's side, also, you have an obligation to do your homework. The agent and the buyer, take a look at it. And if it's something critical to you, like you're only going to buy this house if it turns out it's hardwood flooring throughout and it's not laminate, then check it out and make sure before you put a binding offer in. Or make sure, if you don't have the right or an opportunity for a full inspection of it, that you get a rep and warranty from the seller saying, yes, it is hardwood flooring throughout. It's not vinyl. It's not engineered. It's not laminate. It is hard. If you can get them to, then you've got something to rely on. Okay. But not just, two words in a listing. That's a tougher argument. If it was that important to you, make it part of your contract, is really the bottom line.
Yep. And again, market conditions have a lot to play here, in that example that I said where, the house was literally in multiples, hours after it was listed. It's tough to go through that process. It's tough to address all those issues. It's tough to really, sit down and say, okay, am I covering all the things? Am I really, doing the best I can to protect the buyer? And it's really important that you take a step back in those situations and ensure that you do, attach a copy of the MLS listing, highlight the square footage, put in a warranty and representation into the offer that, this property is being purchased based on the fact that the seller represented that's 2,700 square feet, right? And if the seller signs off and really believes in the strength of that statement, the buyer's position changes drastically on that issue.
Right. Which highlights the importance of having good representation. Okay. It's more important in these type of markets they're in right now, where you're in these multiple offer situations, and even when that slows down a little bit, we're still under pressure. Buyers are under pressure to make decisions pretty quickly these days because the lack of product on the market. So these properties in most neighborhoods are going quickly. So they got to act quickly. When the markets slow down, and we've had historical periods of that too, where you look at a property and then, okay, we're going to go back in a couple of days, and then we're going to bring our mother-in-law, because somehow it's always the mother-in-law that figures out these issues, right? That goes through it and looks at different stuff than the anxious couple. So a few days later, a week later, they get to look at the property again, because there's no pressure of other people buying it. Like, properties used to stay on the market for a period of time before they sold. So you get a chance to go back and revisit things, check things out. You don't have that luxury right now. So you have to have a good agent working for you, doing their homework, doing all the due diligence, taking a look, giving you advice, because you might see the property one time and you got to put an offer in, and you may not have a right for an inspection clause because there's other offers coming in. So you've got to verify the information that's available to you in the listing, walk through, have an agent that, has your experience, even to, that has a construction background a little bit, that can actually understand the difference between a hardwood and a laminate, and have, give you some information on the plumbing, on the electrical system, the age of it, notice signs of deterioration somewhere that, some other agents wouldn't pick up on, right? So critical to have good representation.
Absolutely. And I can't stress this enough. You're always going to notice things you missed the second time around, right? So important to really not rush the process, and really take your time. And I know it's hard, especially in this market, but having the right representation and making sure you take your time going through this process, will really change the outcome of how you kind of go through it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, interesting topic for today. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, and I know there's some things you want to talk about in terms of business development and things too today.
Yeah, I mean, David, we both run pretty big companies, very successful companies, and I think it's important to share with our listeners, some of the small things we do on an everyday basis to really make our companies run more efficiently and more smoothly. And today I really wanted to talk about internal communication, because I think it's really important and drives culture, and it really drives performance. So I wanted to ask you how you guys kind of go about your internal communication.
Well, it's a great question, because we're always evolving in how we do it. Pre-COVID, when we're all in the office, sometimes the internal communication was just, going to someone's desk and saying, hey, I need this done, or this is what's going on. It's easy to talk that way. COVID sort of taught us that we can't do that. We got to make sure we have other ways of communicating too. But even when we did that, a lot of times we would still want to communicate through email or something like that, because we would want to have a trail to go back to, with some information, and that can form part of the file. And when we weren't, now we're pretty much paperless in our office, but before we'd be printing off emails, even internal email communications. I asked the clerk to do something or to follow up. What happened? Did you speak to the client about this? And they'd write back an email, and we could print that off and it's right part of our file. And now we're trying to get rid of that paper, but we still need the communication. So we still do things by email, but we're trying to get off email for our internal communication. And we use Microsoft Teams now. We're part of the Outlook system internally, which is really a great system, because it works as a chat, which is more efficient a lot of ways than email. You don't have to send emails, and we all have too many emails to open. So it's just a chat, and you get an alert, and I can chat with each one of my clerks individually. We can put different groups together, which we do. I've got my financial management team. I've got my partner on a chat. I've got a group of lawyers on a chat, and we can just communicate easily that way. And we're talking about a file. So if I have just a regular transaction file, it's usually me, one of our associate lawyers, and at least one of our clerks that's on that file. We can chat amongst the three of us, so everybody knows what's going on by using that. We can also call each other through that, and we can do a video conference through that. So we're progressing and using that more and more, because we're always trying to find a way to communicate. And you got to communicate with more than one person a lot of times. So it's great that this technology exists, and we're evolving and using it, because it's really important, because we have to keep each other informed as to what's going on in the files. And emails are great, but I can tell you, I know I'll get off this podcast and I'll have 50 emails in the hour for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're very similar, Dave. We use Slack, which is very similar to Microsoft Teams. And again, we have different groups. We have our leadership group, we have a marketing channel, we have the trades and transaction coordinators, right? And it keeps everybody really connected. And it's a great way to really, spearhead projects. And we have Zoom integrated into Slack as well, and we have our calendars integrated into Slack as well. So it's a great resource that also pulls a lot of information from other products as well, and displays it in one place. So it's a great medium to not only communicate with everybody else, but also to pull information. And I can see at a glance of who's doing what, who has what in their calendar, and then just keeps everything organized in one single place. So very similar, and we love Slack, and it really keeps us engaged and united as well.
Yeah, and the calendars are really important too. And in our office, like we have a shared calendar. Everybody has their own calendar, but we have a shared calendar where we book all our meetings and appointments through for anybody. So like right now, everybody in my office, if they want to get a hold of me, they'll see in our calendar that I'm booked out for this hour to have this podcast, because it's right in our shared calendar. So they should know, don't call me for this. In the meantime, I can tell you already I've had 3 attempts to get a hold of me during this podcast, right? Because people just don't look at the calendar, but that's what it's there for. And I find that critical. And it's really a shared calendar amongst the lawyers. Like the clerks don't book off their times in it generally, for most of it, but it's mostly the lawyers' time. But clerks, if they had to go to a doctor, if they're out of the office, if they're on vacation, that goes into our shared calendar too. Or if they're sick, that goes in there as well. And we also produce once a week. We put together a list so we know where everybody's going to be working from. During COVID, we know who's in the office, who's working from home, who's in our Toronto office, who's in the Markham office, who's in the Mississauga office every day. So that's critical to our business too, to know where people are and how to access them properly.
100%. Yeah. And, a lot of these changes have been driven by COVID, right? Like, pre-COVID, you didn't really have the need for some of this integration. But, I know during COVID, like my office, we started doing all our trainings online. And in 2020, we went back and we formulated one email. We kind of put together all the links to all the webinars we did. And we did 42 webinars for our agents in 2020, which is, absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's probably more than any other brokerage will do for their agents. But again, it's our strong belief that we need to train, educate, and support our agents, and that's going to make them leaders in not only in the community but also in the industry, right? And it's going to help them serve their clients better. So technology was really enabled us to do that in a very efficient way, right?
Right. And now you've got these all recorded. You have a library of these. I think of all the seminars, the live seminars that I did in your offices over the years that weren't recorded.
Yep.
And so whoever was able to show up that day, got in and got that information, had that discussion. And those that weren't don't get the benefit of it. Maybe we do the same, we repeat the same one at some other time during the year. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. But now you have a library. So it's amazing. Like there's a lot of positive things in terms of business practice that have come out of COVID. Like just because we've been forced to re-examine our systems and change our systems and how we do things and how we communicate.
Oh, no doubt. And I know it's working, right? Because like we're interviewing agents and agents are coming in and mentioning certain interviews and certain things that were said online. So I know that, agents are actually looking at some of the information that we're putting out before making a decision which brokerage they're going to go with. And our conversion rate is really high in our interviews, and it all has to do with, all the information we put out there in the industry, and we make all our training available to everybody because, like I said, we want to raise the bar in the industry overall. So, we're striving not only to educate our own agents, but we're striving to educate everybody, including the public, right? That's one of the reasons why, we're doing this podcast as well, right?
Yeah. No, it helps, and it helps us, your brokerage and my law firm, it helps us stay on top of things and to be hungry to look for what's next. Like what else is out there? What can we do to improve it? How can we change it? And we're always talking about that in our office. And it's not just me talking to, my partner, Jonathan Cohen. It's us also talking to our financial management group in the office, to, the people that are sort of in the management positions, but then it's the other clerks we want input from. We need input from the associate lawyers. Everybody sees it from a different point of view. Everybody's in the trenches differently than I am to some degree. So everybody's feedback is valuable, and we've used comments from people in helping us evolve and put in these systems and everything. So it never stops. As soon as you think you got something done, there's the next thing, right?
Absolutely. All right, David. So I think we have our topic lined up for our next podcast, which is encroachments. And maybe we can talk about easements at the same time.
Yeah, we certainly can. It's sort of part and parcel to the same thing.
Part and parcel. That's interesting words.
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss if we don't just mention something that we're going to talk more detail, in a future podcast about condominium laws in light of what happened in Florida. And the collapse of that condominium in Surfside, which is just an awful thing to watch. But you watch all the news channels and everything, all discuss them, trying to figure out how could this have been prevented, and what are the laws in Florida, the condominiums, and who governs these things, and how they look at it. And everybody, I'm sure, is thinking about properties here too. Like, are the condos here inspected regularly, and is there money to fix condos and things like that? So I can tell you that the law in Ontario is better than the laws in Florida that they're dealing with. There's more protection under our condominium laws to prevent things like this from happening. But I think it'd be a worthwhile topic down the road to go a little more detail of it, and why we spend so much time looking at condominium status certificates and what information's in there that's really valuable to anybody looking to buy.
I can't stress this enough. And I mean, I know we talked about this in the past, but we're going to continue talking about it because it's a very important topic, right? When you buy a condo, you're not only buying the apartment, but you're buying into the health and safety of the building. And you have to get a condo document reviewed by somebody who, really looks at these on a regular basis, understands budgets, understands, the work that needs to be performed over the next certain amount of years. And there's just so much to it. So absolutely critical.
Yeah. So we'll get into that in a future podcast for sure.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it already.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a safe and productive week. Enjoy your Canada Day. Happy Canada Day to absolutely everybody. Wear that shirt, wear that hat proudly. Enjoy the fireworks and really enjoy the beautiful weather out there as well. And we'll see everybody next week.
Happy Canada Day. Stay safe, everybody. Enjoy.
Stay safe. Thanks.
Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market and dive deep to understand the issues affecting buyers, sellers, investors, and businesses. If you love real estate as much as we do, sit back, relax, and gain an insider's edge to the exciting world of real estate. David Gorski is a broker and the owner of Sutton Summit Realty, a powerhouse brokerage providing guidance to over 180 realtors. And David Korman is a partner at Kormans LLP, a respected law firm specializing in residential and commercial real estate transactions, with offices located in Toronto, Mississauga, and Markham.